This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. A quick little offer before I jump into the introduction of my guest today. Would you like a free audiobook of my book, Trend Following, the 5th edition, my beast mode? Would you like a free copy? Real simple. Go write a review on Amazon for Trend Following, 5th edition only, Amazon.com only, and I will gladly send you an audiobook copy of Trend Following or my book, Turtle Trader. The first 10 people only. I mean, I can only give out so much free stuff in any given day. That's the offer. If you're interested, go give it a shot and get me a new review for Trend Following, the 5th edition, on Amazon.com. Now let's jump into my guest. My guest today, a second appearance, Nir Eyal. His new book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. That almost doesn't need an introduction, does it? Distraction. We want the opposite of that. Because right now, in the modern world, we are distracted like no tomorrow. How do you get around it? What kind of system do you use? What kind of process do you need to have? Do you have a good way to even think about how much distraction you're facing on a daily basis? Nir has done the deep dive. He has dug in and laid it out for us to understand. Because right now, even if we don't know it, even if we don't think about it on a daily basis, we are not getting the best we can do achieved with distraction. If we can't control ourselves, we end up becoming some version of Homer Simpson in the old cartoon. Just some kind of OCD monster that doesn't pay attention to anything except what's the next distraction in front of him or her. Without any further delay, let's jump right in and learn a few lessons or two from Nir Eyal. The way that I started to think about this conversation today was with a post that I put on Facebook. And what did I say? I said something about contemplating the opportunity cost of alcohol. I posted this on New Year's Day. Look, I've seen and done everything, but I really don't drink now. I've got some philosophical reasons for it. A lot of it comes down to distraction. But the interesting thing is when I posted this, asking people to think about the opportunity cost of drinking, somebody came in and said, well, even if you don't like it, I'm not saying this is good or bad, but in my opinion, when you go out with the team, the workers, etc., if you're not drinking, nobody trusts you. I'm like, wow, is this really got to the point where distraction, which is frankly what drinking really is, in my humble opinion, distraction is now kind of got this peer pressure thing, like be distracted with us. Don't you dare get focused. You better be distracted with us. So it really got me thinking about it because, distraction is something pretty crazy today. You're kind of ostracized in a way if you stand outside the box. If you go ahead and say, I will do this. I'm looking at your book right now. I will write a book. In many ways, that's not what the system, that's not what the mob wants. The mob wants you with them, distracted with them.
Yeah, you have hit on the real heart of the issue here is that if you want to have a life that other people don't have, if you want to be somebody that other people aren't, guess what? You have to do things other people don't do. Sometimes that means that you have to be a little strange. You have to be a little bit of an oddball because it's the oddballs who succeed in life. If you go along with the pack, you'll be mediocre by definition. That's what mediocre is. I think you're right that sometimes it does mean that you have to buck the trend. And I really want people to consider is not to live according to anyone else's values. It's not to say, do what I do because I say so. That would be just following any other social imperative. What I want people to do is to ask themselves what their own values are. And no matter what those values are, what I want to help people do is to live out those values. If part of your value system is, you know what, I really want to go out with my friends and drink once in a while, I'm not going to tell you not to. I think that's a personal decision. If you're a grown adult, you can make those kind of choices. What I see happening that really bothers me, and a big reason why I wrote this book, is that we see so many people doing things that they themselves don't want to do, or not doing the things that they know they want to do. And this is me in a nutshell. 5 years ago, when I started working on this book, every day I lived a lie. I would say I was going to work out, but I didn't. I would say I was going to be fully present with my wife, with my daughter, but I wasn't. I was checking my phone or getting distracted by one thing or another. I would go to work and I say, okay, now I'm going to do that thing I've been procrastinating on. I'm finally going to get to the task at hand. I'm going to work on that big report. I'm going to finish that project I've been putting off. But I wouldn't. I would procrastinate yet another day. Living that way, when you say you're going to do one thing and you do something else, when you lie to yourself day in and day out, that is such a heavy burden to carry around. And frankly, I was just sick of it. That's why I embarked on these 5 years of research to figure out this question, the answer to this question of why don't we do what we say we're going to do? And how can we live instead with personal integrity to be the kind of people we know we can be?
You mentioned the word values. Do you think most people, and I am again not trying to say that I've got it all figured out or I'm on high looking down, but do you think most people really, truly, beyond the values of it's really not a smart thing to kill people or steal, et cetera, do you think most people really have their values figured out?
I think we all know, even if we can't say some highfalutin values and list out our vision for the next 5 years, I think what we all have the capability to do is ask ourselves how we want to spend our time. I think that's becoming an increasingly important trait because if you think the world is distracting nowadays, just wait a few years. It's only going to become more distracting. There will be more technologies that are more pervasive, more persuasive to get you to spend your time and your attention and your life the way someone else wants to. There are too many interests out there of people who want you to spend your time the way they want, whether it's the alcohol manufacturers that want you to consume their products, whether it's the media companies that want you to consume their products, whether it's your boss, your coworkers, who knows, all kinds of things out there can lead you off track from doing the things you want to do with your life. Those are the distractions I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about the tech distractions. I'm talking about all the things in life that can pull you away from doing what you know you want to do with your time and your life.
Do you think people really know what they want to do?
I think if they don't, then they're probably not my audience, to be honest. I don't know if I can help those people. What I want to do is to help the people who know what they want. If you're anything like I used to be, despite the fact that I know what I wanted, I knew I wanted to take care of my body. That's one of my values. I wanted to take care of my health. If you ask people what's the most important things in life, it's your health, it's your family, it's your friends. This is common sense kind of stuff. Yet when you ask people, well, how do you spend your time? Do you invest in those things? The answer is typically not really. We do those things kind of whenever we feel like it, which is not very often. What I want to do is to help the people who know what they want to do, whether it's take care of their physical and mental health, whether it's taking care of the people they love in their life and they're not spending enough quality time with, whether it's doing their best work as opposed to being distracted with one procrastinating task or another. That's really who I want to speak to.
I like that because if we really knew the answer to my question, if we had to look at the bell curve and say, what is the size of the population compared to the overall population that wants your message or wants my message, I might hazard a guess that it's small. I just wonder from a big picture standpoint, how many people really truly know what they want to do. But I like your answer. Let's don't focus on that. Let's focus on the people that really do kind of have this idea, this direction, this path, but they're getting knocked off the ledge. They're not focused. They can't keep it going in a straight direction.
Yeah, what I discovered in the 5 years researching and writing this book is that a lot of the personal productivity tips that we are fed over the past several years actually make the problem worse.
What's a good example right off the top of your head?
The to-do list. We're all told that to get things done, we have to write things down, put them on a to-do list, and then just tick off the things on the to-do list. That if you can become the master of the to-do list, you'll get everything done you want to do every day.
I'm currently looking at one.
Okay, there you go. So I bought this hook, line, and sinker. I adopted all the best practices. What I discovered was that for most people out there, using a to-do list backfires. What it does for most of us, and if you're anything like me, you'll relate to this story. I would have this to-do list of 100 things I needed to do today. And I'd get done, I'd have a very productive day. I'd get done with 10 things on my to-do list. And at the end of the day, I'd look at my to-do list and I'd say, wait a minute, yet another day that I didn't do what I said I was going to do. I've still got all these things that I didn't accomplish. When I wanted to watch Netflix, when I wanted to spend time with my daughter, when I wanted to just relax, I always felt guilty that there was more to be done. This insane busyness of always feeling like we have to do more. It's perpetuated by this feeling we get at the end of the day saying, oh, another day went and I didn't do everything I said I was going to do. These to-do lists in many ways reinforce this identity of being someone who can't live with personal integrity, who lies to themselves, who doesn't do what they say they're going to do. That's just one of many things that I found out in my research that can actually backfire if we don't use it properly.
To clarify, on my little to-do list, it doesn't change much. And it's kind of like this: write a book, make this film. So there's like 5 or 6 points. It's just so I remember these very big picture things. I don't generally do one for the day. I generally don't do that. I know if I have to talk to you on a podcast, that's about the extent of it.
The much better strategy, just to kind of give some people hope in terms of, wait a minute, if I'm not supposed to use a to-do list, what am I supposed to do? We should back up a second to talk about what do I mean by distraction. I know I used this term a few times. It's good to kind of clarify what I mean by that term. To understand distraction, you have to understand what is the opposite of distraction. Most people will tell you the opposite of distraction is focus, but I don't agree. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. That in fact, both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. They both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. Traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, anything that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that you are not doing with intent. This dichotomy is super important for 2 reasons. Number one, anything can be a distraction. How many times have you sat down at your desk and said, okay, I'm going to work on that big project. I'm going to get this task done. Here I go. I'm going to stop procrastinating. I'm going to get this project done, but let me check email first. Well, let me work on that one thing on my to-do list that's pretty easy to do, right? I'll get some momentum going. And those things feel productive. The email, the Slack channel checking, it feels good. It feels like it's something I have to do anyway. But I would argue that is just as much of a distraction. Why? Because it's taking you off track from what you plan to do with your time. Anything can be a distraction. So the idea here is if you don't know what you want to do with your time, then everything is a distraction. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Instead of using a to-do list, what we want to do is to keep a time box calendar where we know for the first time in most of our lives, we know what is the difference between what is traction, what is what I want to be doing with my time, and what is everything else that is not on that calendar would be a distraction, which allows us, ironically enough, to do the things that we would otherwise think of distractions. So let me give you an example. I like watching Netflix. There's nothing wrong with Netflix or Facebook or YouTube or Instagram. This technology isn't evil. It's not melting our brains. It's not addicting everybody. That is hogwash. If we plan time for it, there's nothing wrong with it. In my calendar, I have time for social media, just as I have time scheduled for email or for anything else that might otherwise be a distraction. I've turned what would otherwise be a distraction into traction by planning time for it. So I'm using it on my schedule and according to my values, not based on some company's values and some company's schedule.
It's harder and harder for me to remember, even though I was in my 20s, when Netscape went public in 1995. So there's D-Day before and after. It's hard for me to remember, and for older people and younger people that didn't have the experience, it's hard to remember what it felt like before the internet, then followed by social media, took over our lives. I don't feel like I was distracted as much prior to the advent of all of our current tech. But then again, if I think back, okay, well, hold on. I didn't have tech, but I had that damn TV. I had video games. There was an Atari 2600 in the 80s. This idea that distraction has been elevated or pushed so far along the curve today versus before, I don't know. In 1975, people were sitting around their house playing Pong for 10 hours.
Yeah. And before, we talked about booze. That's a great distraction that for many, many people, we had a similar debate. We're approaching almost 100 years of prohibition. People thought that was the answer. Let's just make it illegal, that would be the answer. Of course, that's not the answer because distraction has been around for a very long time. Believe it or not, Plato talked about distraction 2,500 years ago, 2,500 years before the iPhone. Plato talked about how distracting the world was back then.
What was his wisdom that he had to say about distraction back in the day?
He called it in the Greek akrasia, the tendency to do things against our better interests. And he wondered this very same question, I think is just as relevant today. If we know what to do, why don't we just do it? That's something that we still struggle with today. And that's really the jumping off point to understand distraction, is to understand the deeper psychology behind this, I think, age-old question of if we know what to do, and today more than ever, you could argue that maybe a few decades ago, before the internet, people just didn't know what to do. How do you lose weight? I don't know. Teach me. Today, who doesn't know how to get in shape? Right? If you don't know, Google it. If you don't know how to get better at your job, it's pretty common sense. You got to do the work, especially the hard stuff that other people don't want to do. But if you don't know the answer, everybody has access to Google. Everybody can get the answers. There is no more information gap. The answers are out there. We basically know what to do. The problem is not that we don't know what to do. The problem is we don't know how to stop getting distracted. That is the real source of the problem.
Let's talk about motivation. I wake up each day. I don't work for anybody. I haven't worked for anybody, I don't know, since I was in a warehouse at Circuit City boxing TVs at age 19. I have not held a job, but I'm motivated every damn day. I wake up every day and I do something in my world. I don't stop. I don't run crazy 18-hour days anymore, like my late 20s, early 30s, but I'm very motivated. I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm working on. I know what feels nice to me. I have this sense of peace, this sense of enjoyment. I feel like the motivation part is very easy for me. What motivates us, though? In a big picture standpoint, what really motivates people? Maybe I've got part of it figured out. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But what does motivate us?
It's actually, I think, where we need to start if we want to answer Plato's question of why don't we do what we say we're going to do? We need to start with the real first principles question of why do we do anything? What is the nature of human motivation? And it's the nature of human motivation is not what most people think it is. Most people think if you ask, what is motivation all about? Why do people do what they do? Most people will give you some version of carrots and sticks, that everything we do is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. It turns out, however, that this is not exactly right, that Freud's pleasure principle neurologically is not true, that we do not do things for the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but in fact, neurologically, it's about pain all the way down. Everything we do for one reason only, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations. When we think about craving, wanting, desire, lusting, there's a reason we say love hurts, because neurologically that is exactly what's going on. It's called the homeostatic response. If you think about it physiologically, if you go outside and it's cold, that's uncomfortable, so you put on a coat. If you go back inside, now it's too hot, you take it off. If you feel hunger pangs, that doesn't feel good, so you eat. And if you're stuffed, now you ate too much, oh, that's uncomfortable, you stop eating. Physiologically, this is common sense. We see this working all the time. What we don't realize is that the same principle holds true for our psychological sensations. When you're feeling lonely, you check Facebook. When you're uncertain, Google. When you're bored, check ESPN, stock prices, the news, Instagram, Pinterest, Reddit. All of these products and services cater to these uncomfortable internal triggers, these uncomfortable sensations that we seek to escape. Which brings us to this conclusion that if all human behavior is prompted by a desire to escape discomfort, that means, therefore, that time management is pain management. that at the source of all human behavior is the desire to escape discomfort. If we don't fundamentally understand this fact that the reason we get distracted, the reason we procrastinate, the reason we sit at the dinner table and can't stand but check our phones as opposed to being with our family, or aren't working on that big project, or check email in the middle of an important meeting, the reason we are doing this stuff, the reason we go off track, the answer to Plato's question is that we are incapable of dealing with our discomfort in a healthy manner. That's the source of the problem. It's not our technology. It's not the external triggers, the things going on around us. It's about what's going on inside of us.
I did not mention it. You did not mention it. I have not looked at data for a long time. I assume that if I was to look at the top 50 URLs across the planet, that a significant number are still porn. In terms of distraction, in terms of reaching for something, quite literally, it's probably one of our most huge distractions that we have.
Yeah, whether it's porn, whether it's booze, whether it's the news. Why are we watching so much news? We can't do anything about 99.9% of the news we read about. We read the news because we want to hear about other people's problems so that we don't have to think about our own problems.
Where do you, when you find that person, pushing aside the person that doesn't know who they are, what they are, but the person that kind of, they've got their stuff going in the right direction, but they really are struggling with distraction. How do you start to, if you were to kind of like sit down and analyze somebody, how do you start to A to Z? Where does that process begin? What's the intake for what you would want to first understand about their life to wrap your arms around what their daily grind is, and then how you might go about taking some of that information in, helping them to understand, hey, look, here's a better process that you can follow?
People tend to fall into two categories. I call them the blamers or the shamers. The blamers are the ones who say, oh, it's the technology, it's Facebook, it's the iPhone, or here's my favorite, it's the modern world. That's what's doing it to me. That's who's at fault. They blame things outside of themselves. That's pointless because you're not going to change any of that stuff. You have no agency and control over those companies. Facebook's not going to suddenly go away. Your email is not suddenly going to stop coming. It's pointless to blame those things outside you. Then you have the other category. You have what's called the shamers. The shamers, they take it on the inside. They say, well, there must be something wrong with me. When they get distracted, they say, you see, I'm lazy, or I'm not cut out for this job, or I have a short attention span, or you see, once again, I didn't do what I said I was going to do. They shame themselves, which of course makes the problem even worse because we know, what do we do when we shame ourselves? We feel worse. And when we feel worse, we spur more of these internal triggers that we seek to distract ourselves from in the first place. We just make the problem even worse. We don't want to be blamers. We don't want to be shamers. We want to be claimers. Claimers claim responsibility over their actions, meaning it's not your fault that these things exist. You didn't invent the iPhone. You didn't invent email. You didn't invent Slack channels, all these potential distractions. You didn't invent this stuff. It's not your fault. But it is your responsibility because while you can't control how you feel, that is not in your control. You can control your response, which is where the word responsibility comes from. You can control your response to those sensations. The idea here is to react to those uncomfortable internal triggers in a healthier manner. That distraction is about impulse control. It's about reaching for the phone, reaching for the remote, reaching for the bottle impulsively without thinking ahead whether this is actually what I want to be doing right now, whether this is traction or distraction. What we want to do is to reshape those impulsive behaviors, break those bad habits so that we do more healthful behaviors as opposed to these more harmful behaviors. There's all kinds of strategies we can use. The book is not some frou-frou, my personal pet techniques that I use. No. I spent 5 years researching these techniques, and there's 20 pages of citations from peer-reviewed studies that show exactly science-based techniques that anyone can use to make sure that they master these internal triggers and ultimately control distraction. So there's all kinds of things we can do. Many of them are very, very simple. For example, one of my favorite techniques that I talk about in the book is called the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule tells us that we can give in to any temptation, whether it's that piece of chocolate cake you know you shouldn't have, or whether it's checking email when you should be working on a big project, or smoking that cigarette, whatever it might be, we can give in to that temptation in just 10 minutes. Now, why is this technique so effective? Why not just say no, as Nancy Reagan told us in the 80s? Why don't we all just say no? Well, because strict abstinence tends to backfire. I'll demonstrate right now. I'm going to ask you not to do something that you have not done all day long. So it's not going to be very hard to do. If you haven't done it all day long, how hard can it be to not do this? What I want you to not do, I do not want you right now to think about a white bear. Don't think about a white bear. Of course, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about nothing but the white bear. What happens when we tell ourselves not to do something is that we tend to ruminate. It becomes very difficult not to think about it. What happens when we tell ourselves don't do something, resist with this bogus idea that you see these days of let's do a digital detox or a 30-day digital diet. The reason it doesn't work is because we aren't addressing the root cause. We're just telling ourselves no without giving ourselves a technique, a method to cope with that discomfort. What happens is when we tell ourselves don't do it, 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 and we finally give in, that relief of the tension of telling ourselves not to do something, in fact, feels good. It feels like a relief to no longer have to tell ourselves not to do something. We reinforce, it is registered as pleasure. We reinforce the very behavior we are trying not to do. Instead of strict abstinence, what we can do is use a technique like the 10-minute rule to tell ourselves, okay, I can give into that temptation, I can give into that distraction in just 10 minutes. Sometimes I'll just set a timer and I'll say, okay, set this timer for 10 minutes. I'll put my phone down. My job in those 10 minutes, I have two choices. I can either get back to the task at hand or surf the urge. Now, surfing the urge is this term that comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. What you want to do is to just explore that sensation with curiosity rather than contempt. To just sit there for 10 minutes, okay, until the clock runs out. After the clock runs out, you can give into the temptation and just sit with that feeling. What is it that you are experiencing? Stress, anxiety, uncertainty, fatigue. What is that sensation you're experiencing? What you will find is within those 10 minutes, 9 times out of 10, that sensation, that internal trigger that you're looking to escape from will crest and then subside. You want to ride it like a surfer on a surfboard. That's what surfing the urge is all about. You will find that by the time that clock is up, you will actually be back at that task at hand without getting distracted. That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of one technique that anybody can start using immediately.
Let me throw one out at you. You can give me your feedback. You can tell me what you think. No one has had the ability to call my cell phone and have it ring since 2012.
You're tuning off your ringer constantly?
Well, if I'm outside the States, yes, that makes it even harder. But yeah, I don't have the ringer on at all. And I don't miss it. Now, the only thing that's interesting about that is it's not really my reaction. It's not really my fear of what I might be missing. It's interesting to watch the fear of other people. Where are you? I don't have any of that. What is it that causes most people to hear something like that? Can't call Mike for 8 or 9 years. What would cause most people to feel like, oh my God, that sounds psychotic? What if somebody dies? And my thought is very stoic. What if somebody dies? Somebody dies all the time.
It's true. Yeah. This is the third technique. So step number 1 is about mastering the internal triggers. Step number 2 is about making time for traction. We can come back to that one in a minute. Step number 3 is about hacking back the external triggers. And that's what you're doing here. You're making sure that you hacked back the external triggers that might disturb you during your focused work time. And the nice part is you don't actually have to go to such an extreme measure as you've done here, that the folks listening, we have so many tools today that make it so easy to hack back these external triggers. And as much as we like to complain about big tech doing this and doing that to us, addicting us and hijacking our brains, there's nothing they can do about it. If you delete Facebook from your phone, if you turn off the notification settings, Zuckerberg can't turn that back on. There's nothing these companies can do about it. Simple tools, for example, now every iPhone, and I think every Android phone as well, comes with this wonderful setting called Do Not Disturb While Driving. Here's how it works. So when you want to do focused work, you have that time in your schedule. You say, okay, I want to work for 45 minutes without distraction, an hour, whatever amount of time you want to work without distraction. You push one button on your phone, and if anybody calls you or texts you, they will get an automatic reply that says, I'm indistractable right now. You can customize the auto reply. I think generically it says I'm driving at the moment. But if this is urgent, text me with the word urgent. If they type in the word urgent, then the message will come through. Now, I've been using this for years. Nobody's ever typed in with urgent. It's the fear, it's the irrational fear that someone might need to contact us, not the actual need itself. Today, we have these wonderful technologies. And ironically enough, the solution to tech distraction is oftentimes more tech that helps us block out these distractions.
My example that I don't think you used the word extreme, maybe you did, but maybe other people will be thinking my example is extreme. I look at it like this. It's kind of like being a teenager circa 1984. You're in your bedroom somewhere in the States. There weren't cell phones. If a message came in, it went to a voicemail. You handled it the next day. I just don't have any of that fear that someone can't call me. They can email me. It might not be immediate. There can still be an instant message that can come to me, but perhaps it's that distraction of the voice and the distraction of the conversation. I have found that the text messaging is much more efficient and requires less of my time, whereas I might want to put more of my time at writing or whatnot.
And for most people, that's exactly right. That if somebody really needs to contact you, they're not going to send you an email. If your house is on fire, they're going to text, they're going to call, they're going to use some other more urgent medium.
I'm going to burn down, though, if the house is on fire, so I'm screwed.
Assuming you're not in the house. But there's the right channel for the right message. And I think that we're learning as a society what is the right channel based on how urgent it needs a reply for pretty much all other notifications, whether that's Slack channels or emails, everything except text messages and phone calls. You really don't need all of those external triggers, all the pings and dings in your life. Many of those things we can turn off. The central question needs to be, is this external trigger serving me or am I serving it? If you're a slave to the pings and dings, well, it's time to take back responsibility, time to take back control by asking yourself that very important question of, are you serving the trigger or is the trigger serving you? Now, a very common response is, okay, that's all well and good, but what if it's my boss? What if my boss needs to reach me? Well, that gets into this whole other topic in terms of company culture and what is the root cause of distraction in the workplace. And it turns out that in my research, there's a whole chapter in the book around this topic. Turns out that distraction in the workplace is a symptom of a dysfunctional company culture. Starting with one of the things that I found is one of the most effective ways that you can manage your manager is to have what's called a schedule sync. We talked about earlier about how we have to make time for traction, how we have to turn our values into time by planning out our day. When we do that, for the first time, we'll be able to know the difference between traction and distraction. And one of the ancillary benefits is that we can show this time box calendar to our colleagues, to the stakeholders in our life that deserve our time. For example, with my wife and I sit down every week for 15 minutes and we just review our week ahead. We used to fight about all kinds of household responsibilities. Why wasn't I doing my share? We had these arguments about this. We never have those arguments anymore. In the workplace as well, your boss will worship the ground you walk on. If you sit down with them for just 10, 15 minutes, show them your time box calendar, show them your week ahead and say, look, boss, here's what's on my calendar for the week ahead. Here on this other piece of paper is all the stuff I won't be able to fit in my calendar. Help me reprioritize. We all hear this stupid trope that we should say no. Just say, if you don't want to get distracted, just say no. Well, how do we do that to our boss, the person who cuts our check every month? How do we tell that person, no, we don't want to do a job? We can't. What we want to do is to have them say no. The only way to do that is to show your manager, show your boss, here's my schedule, here's what I'm doing the week ahead. If there's something that I should reprioritize, help me switch those things around. They will love this. A lot of managers don't want to ask their employees to do this because they feel like they're micromanaging. But if you do this proactively, this will change your life.
Last weekend, the lady in my life was out for most of the day. I drifted into a writing bender, did not come up for air for, 10 hours. Complete flow state, had no idea what time it was. Then, when I came up for air, a bunch of text messages. Where are you? What are you doing? Why did you not answer me? Whereas I could have just said from the beginning, hey, I'm going to drift today. You're going to know where I am, but you're not going to hear from me during that state. That little action by me would have stopped her reaction later in the day.
Absolutely. You could use that do not disturb while driving feature to really, if it really is an emergency, okay, then you can get through if you text the word urgent.
As you go down the path of giving me more tech to solve tech, Is there something to be said, though, for the Luddite versions of stopping some of this stuff? Or has it become, because I mean, look, even your example with the app or the feature that you were talking about, the urgent part, I just feel like that's still kind of a Band-Aid on an issue. I get it, but it's still addressing fears that perhaps are irrational in some way. I mean, I guess somebody can make an argument, well, hold on, Mike, this really makes a lot of sense to have this urgent feature. But then again, I think somebody could say, well, hold on, when does it stop? When does it end?
Yeah, I agree with you that first and foremost, the first step to managing distraction has to be mastering the internal triggers. I couldn't agree with you more that we have to ask ourselves, is this a rational fear or are we just reacting in response to something that might happen? When I was overweight, I used to be clinically obese. I no longer am. I wish I could tell you it was the food's fault. It was McDonald's that made me overweight. No, it wasn't. It was because I wasn't eating because I was hungry. I was eating to fill some kind of emotional need. That's very much the case when it comes to distraction. It's not that something is a rational fear. It's about that we just want that ability to escape. We're making an excuse for why we want this pacification device, like a baby with their pacifier. We want that binky to hold on to help us cope with these uncomfortable sensations. If we can learn better tools to help us deal with that discomfort in a helpful manner, as opposed to letting ourselves get distracted, that absolutely should be the first step. But some people out there legitimately do have things that they might need to respond to. Thank goodness we have these solutions today, inside the technologies that can help us cope with the potential triggers in a way that doesn't always lead to distraction, that we can feel a bit at ease to say, okay, if it's really, really an emergency, there will be a way to contact me.
Let's talk about email. I would not be here talking to you today without email. Email has completely changed my life, made my business, is probably the root piece of tech that gave me any wealth that I have today. I mean, it really starts in 1994, 1995 with email. And oh, by the way, as a really odd side note for any of you out there, I have every damn email that I have received or sent since 1996, which is pretty crazy, huh? I was not a Google guy. It was all offline stuff saved. But let's talk about email. So my daily routine starts probably like most people. I will check the email in the morning. Now, I want you to kind of clarify and give some other perspectives because I'm probably in the dark. I just do my own thing. I'm pretty lucky that I don't have a lot of spam stuff. Maybe there's 10 things I delete every morning without even opening them, and I can tell is just spam. I have a handful or a sort of number of client issues to deal with, maybe a couple of people that I'm working with, but otherwise it's pretty minimal. What are most people doing with and faced with their email today?
Email is this scourge of the modern workplace where people feel like they are just drowning in email. There have been several time studies that show where people waste the most time on email. It's not where you'd expect. It turns out where we waste time on email, it's not so much the checking, it's not the replying. It turns out where we waste the most time on email is the rechecking of email. And this is how it works. Open up an email, you read it, you put it away. You open an email, you read it, you put it away. That is where we waste time on email.
Why do people reread the email?
Yeah, it's called variable reward. The reason that emails are so habit forming, the reason that we find ourselves checking and checking and checking is that there's uncertainty. It's kind of like Skinner. Skinner used to have these Skinner boxes and he put a pigeon in them and had a little reward that every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would get a little food pellet. He found that when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement, the pigeon would peck the disc much more often. The reason email is so engaging, the reason we keep checking and checking and checking it is that we are looking for variability. There's all kinds of uncertainty there. What does the message say?
Are we checking to see new emails or are we checking to reread the one that we've already read?
Well, many times we forget and then we say, wait, what's in the email again? What does it say? What do I need to do? Because of all this variability and uncertainty, we keep checking and checking and checking without some kind of process to properly deal with those emails. What most people do is they just deal whatever happens to be at the top of their email inbox whenever they have time to check it. They keep going to email whenever they don't know what else to do. When I'm not really sure the best place to spend my time.
Just the checking of it, though. It's not necessarily the rereading of a message they've already read. It's just the act of checking.
No, it is the rereading. What I advise people to do is when you get that message, you have to ask yourself just one question, not what is the contents of the email. That's not really important. What you need to ask yourself is, when does it need a reply? Based on that answer, it's going to fall into a few different categories. Number one, it could never need a reply, in which case just delete it or archive it. The other end of the spectrum is, oh my gosh, house on fire, you have to respond to this email right this minute. That's maybe 1% of your emails. Typically, people will call or text you, so that's very, very few emails. All the rest of the emails fall into one of two buckets. Either emails that need a response today or emails that need a response sometime this week, okay? What I want folks to do is, when you get every email, what you want to do is to touch each email only 2 times. The first time, you're opening it and you're labeling it. If you don't know how to use labels, just Google it. Every email program can do this. You want to label it with either one of 2 labels, not the subject matter, when it needs a reply, either today or this week. Here's how it saves you a ton of time. When you get to in your day and you say, okay, I have scheduled time in my day to respond to email. I'm not going to use it whenever I don't know what else to do. I'm going to use it only when I tell myself in my calendar that is my time. Now, you can plan to check email every hour if you want, but what I want you to do is to schedule that time with intent, so that you are checking the email on your schedule, not on someone else's schedule, so that you can make time for that focused work. Let's say you work for an hour and you say, okay, every hour I'm going to check my email for 15 minutes, whatever the case might be. You use that email time to only respond to the emails that need a response today. That's going to be about 20% of your emails on average. Then all those other emails, the emails that you can wait a little while, the ones that can be responded to sometime this week, this is where the magic happens. Because you can say, well, aren't I just delaying the inevitable? If I'm postponing when I'm going to check those emails that don't need an urgent reply, I still have to reply to them someday, don't I? Not really. What I want you to do is to book a big chunk of time in your week. For me, I have 3 hours every Monday. I call it Message Monday, where I comb through all of those messages that need a response, but not immediately. There's this amazing thing that happens when you let emails marinate. People forget the math of email. If you want to receive fewer emails per a given period of time, you have to send fewer emails per a given period of time. What you will find is, when you let emails wait a bit, when you don't reply to every email as it comes in and separate the ones that need to be replied to today from the ones that can wait a little bit, replied to sometime this week, then you go back and reply to those emails that can wait, you'll find that about half of them don't even need a reply anymore. Why? People figure out their own issues. The thing that was so urgent then turned out to be not so urgent, or got crushed under the weight of some other priority. Many of those emails, when you just let them simmer, turns out didn't even need a reply from you in the first place. That's how we can really reduce the amount of time we spend on email, is by labeling those emails, making time in our calendar to batch process them, only process the ones that are urgent today, and leave the rest for a batch process one time per week.
This just could be because of the way my life has unfolded and the way that I have learned to use email. I found quite interesting over the years that response time, I guess for the important emails, can be very important. I think to myself, well, what is so important about the response time? Obviously, people want quick responses if they're asking something of me and they want something from me, and potentially it could help me too. There's a win-win there. But I think it really comes down to personal touch, is that email, in many ways, depending on how it's used, becomes a conversation. If you are human, people like to feel a sense of, hey, he responded to me. Oh, wow, he's real. Oh, it was quick. It wasn't 2 weeks later. So response time and personal touch really blend in there. It's an interesting issue. You're definitely laying out all kinds of hacks that are so smart. But it is a tricky issue because, as I said from the start, from my own personal experience, email is really probably the number one piece of tech that has made me.
Yeah, and that's why I don't recommend that people go on these 30-day digital detoxes or do some kind of extreme program, because for the vast majority of us, we need this for our livelihood. I think it's rude not to respond to an email. I respond to every email I get, unless it really doesn't deserve a reply. If it's a real human, I'm going to respond. It's the right thing to do. Now, what we don't want is that we don't want email to constantly make us prioritize what we think is urgent at the expense of the important. That's when it becomes a problem. There are 2 types of work. There is reactive work and reflective work. Most of us work in jobs that have some mix of the two. Now, some jobs are one or the other. For example, if you work in a call center, your job is 100% reactive. If the phone rings, you pick it up, you handle the customer, it's 100% reactive. If you're a computer engineer, most of your job is reflective. You don't respond constantly. You're not reacting. You're in reflective mode. It's the maker versus manager schedule. You want to just focus on what you're doing. Now, most people, however, work in some kind of balance between the two. They need time to react and they need time to reflect. However, reacting is so much easier than reflecting. Most people's calendar is full of reactive work, reacting to emails, reacting to phone calls, reacting to meetings. They make no time for reflection. All they're doing is reacting to what's happening as opposed to making time to plan, to strategize, to work on the stuff that's actually important, that requires focus. That stuff gets crowded out. Their work suffers for it. It's really about making sure you protect that reflective time in your day and don't let it get crowded out by all of the reactive tasks like email.
The audience is going to have to check it out, take the deep dive, because we're just doing kind of a cursory run through on the content of your newest book. But we should also keep in mind, as we talk about all these business issues and whatnot, this notion of distraction is far beyond business. I mean, home life, relationships, etc. I've already brought up the one example. You've brought up the example with your wife. Let's just talk about something really basic. I mean, indistractable lover. Right now, I'm sure a lot of people out there are distracted lovers.
I certainly was. My wife and I, we've been married for 18 years. A few years ago, we found that we were getting to bed night after night, later and later and later. And my wife was caressing her iPhone and I was fondling my iPad, and we weren't being intimate with each other. That was a big problem for our relationship. Originally, we blamed the technology, like most people do, but that didn't work. The extreme measures of just getting rid of the tech didn't solve the problem. We had to work our way through these 4 steps of identifying the internal triggers, as we talked about earlier, mastering those internal triggers, making time for traction. If you want to have a better sex life, you need to have a better sleep practice, meaning in our household, we now have a bedtime. We tell our kids that they need a bedtime, but we don't enforce our own bedtime. We're hypocrites in that respect. And we know that if there's one thing that is absolutely imperative to your physical and psychological well-being, it's getting sufficient rest. Now we have a bedtime. 10 p.m. is when we get to bed. Then the third step that we took, and this is about hacking back the external triggers that we talked about earlier, we removed anything that might interrupt sleep from the bedroom. The bedroom is now a sacred space. We don't have anything that pings or dings. We don't sleep with our cell phones. We sleep with each other. Our cell phones are outside the bedroom. If there's one piece of advice I'd love everyone to follow, is that you do not want anything that disturbs your sleep with some ping or ding in the bedroom. Leave that stuff outside. We don't even have a TV in the bedroom anymore because we didn't want that to interrupt that intimate time together. The final thing that we did that I think really helped us a tremendous amount was, in order to help us keep this contract with ourselves that we are going to get to bed on time, that we are going to have time for each other every night, I went to the hardware store and I bought us this outlet timer. This outlet timer it's very simple. It costs like $10. You can basically program this outlet timer to turn anything that's plugged into it off at a certain time of day or night. Every night in our household at 10 p.m., our internet shuts off automatically, whether we like it or not. That is an example of what we call a pre-commitment device. And the idea of a pre-commitment device is that it adds some friction in between you and something that you don't want to do, the distraction. Could I fiddle with that device and turn the internet back on? Of course I could. But now it inserts this moment of mindfulness to ask myself, wait a minute, do I really need to keep checking email this late? Do I really need to go on social media right now as opposed to being with my wife? No, now I'm mindful about the behavior as opposed to just mindlessly scrolling and scrolling away.
To add to your distraction list, especially the sleeping one, a reminder for everybody, you'll see this in modern bedrooms, especially modern hotel rooms. Go into a modern hotel room, turn the lights off, and how many artificial lights are still on in a hotel room? Those things are as bad as the sound. So I just wanted to add the light notion there too. Getting rid of that artificial light is a huge aspect of sleeping.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Nir, thank you for coming on. The new book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Again, we have just touched on the topics and the content and the hacks that you go through. I'm holding this fine book in my hands. It is about, it's about an inch thick, maybe a little bit thicker than an inch. Very fine yellow cover, cannot be missed. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. It's great to be back. My second episode here. I'm honored.
Hey, where can we send people? Where would you like them to go? What website would you like them to find?
Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, my website is nirandfar.com, but Nir is spelled like my first name. So that's Nir and far.com.
Nir, I appreciate you coming on. Again, I wait for the next book. I know there will be a number 3.
I appreciate it. Great to be back. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.